There is a silence that descends upon a life when loss arrives, a silence so profound it seems to echo in every corner of the heart. For a mother, that silence is heavier still. It is not merely the absence of sound, but the absence of what once filled the air with warmth, laughter, and the tiny, irreplaceable moments that stitched together a life. The first time she felt it, she did not even recognize it as grief. It was an emptiness that pressed against her chest, an invisible weight that made every breath feel laborious. Imagine the world continuing, relentlessly bright and indifferent, while within the colors of life fade. The birds still sing, the sun still rises, yet she feels suspended in a quiet void where time refuses to move. This is the beginning of a journey few speak of, the kind that is private yet universal, a confrontation with the raw, unfiltered edge of suffering. Loss has a way of stripping away illusions. In the weeks after her child's passing, the mother wandered through the motions of life, her mind a restless river, carrying fragments of memory and questions without answers. Why this? Why now? Could she have done something differently? These questions spun endlessly, yet never offered comfort. They were the mind's desperate attempt to anchor itself amidst the storm. It is here in this turbulence that the seed of awakening quietly begins. The heart, though shattered, becomes attentive. The mother starts noticing the subtle rhythms of life she once took for granted, the way sunlight falls on the floor, the hush of evening, the faint, steady beat of her own pulse. Pain has a way of sharpening awareness. The very act of noticing becomes a first step toward understanding, a doorway into a different kind of seeing. In Buddhist teaching, suffering is not something to be avoided or denied. It is dukkha, the inherent unsatisfactoriness woven into existence. To face it fully is to begin the process of awakening. And yet, awakening does not arrive in grand epiphanies. It starts in whispers, in the small, almost imperceptible moments when the mind pauses and the heart remembers itself. For this mother, the early days were spent oscillating between numbness and waves of unbearable sorrow. She would sit in quiet, tears falling, questioning the fairness of life, while the world moved on around her as if nothing had changed. Yet even in these moments, there were glimmers, a memory that surfaced not to deepen the grief but to reveal the love that still lingered, a sigh that carried a fragment of relief however fleeting, a sense that even in suffering life was pressing upon her with a subtle insistence. Notice, attend, breathe. The paradox of grief is that it isolates, yet it also opens the doors to connection. In the solitude of her sorrow, she would begin to understand the universality of loss. Countless others had walked similar paths, mothers, fathers, children, strangers, and friends. Every tear shed was mirrored in another life somewhere. Every pang of longing was a reminder of the interconnected web of existence. This realization, quiet and unassuming, would slowly guide her toward the path that pain alone could not illuminate: mindfulness, acceptance, and the gentle cultivation of compassion for herself, and ultimately for the world around her. And so, in the midst of silence, the journey begins, not with answers, not with comfort, but with the willingness to feel, to confront the emptiness, to let the heart speak its truth, however raw. The first steps are uncertain, tentative, yet each one carries a profound significance. For it is only by standing within the depths of our own suffering that we can glimpse the possibility of transformation. As the mother sits quietly, letting the silence wash over her, the story of awakening is quietly set in motion. It will unfold in ways she cannot yet predict, through memory, reflection, practice, and the subtle guidance of impermanence. This is the threshold where grief and wisdom meet, where loss, though unbearable, begins to teach. It is not a promise of happiness, but a promise of understanding. The world outside continues to rush on, but inside a delicate shift is occurring, almost imperceptible. The heart, though broken, is learning to breathe differently. The mind, though restless, is beginning to notice its own movements. And in these small awakenings, the first threads of a new story are quietly woven, one in which suffering is no longer merely endured, but observed, understood, and eventually transformed. The first days after a loss are not measured in hours or minutes. They are measured in the depth of absence, in the weight that presses against the chest, in the hollow spaces that once held warmth, laughter, and life. For this mother, each morning began with a question she could not answer. How do you greet a world that has moved on without the one you loved most? Grief is not a linear path. It is a storm that sweeps through the mind and body in unpredictable waves. One moment, she felt numb, as if the world had turned to stone. The next, a wave of anguish would crash, leaving her gasping for breath. It was in these moments that she truly confronted the nature of dukkha, the Buddhist understanding of suffering, the recognition that life, by its very essence, is woven with dissatisfaction, impermanence, and loss. She remembered holding her child just days before, the laughter, the warmth of a small hand pressed against hers. And now, those memories cut sharper than any reality, because they existed only in the past, unreachable, untouchable. Every image, every sound, every tiny detail became a reminder of what she had lost. And yet, it was impossible to resist them, for they were threads connecting her to a love that death could not erase. The mother wandered through her days in a fog, performing the rituals of life mechanically. Meals were eaten without taste. Conversations were rehearsed rather than engaged in. Sleep came in fragments, haunted by dreams that brought her child near only to take them away again. She was caught between two realities, the world moving forward, relentless and indifferent, and an inner landscape frozen in a perpetual winter of sorrow. It is said that suffering teaches lessons, but these lessons are never gentle. They arrive not as advice but as experience, brutal, unyielding, unavoidable. In the quiet of her grief, she began to see the impermanence of all things, not as a philosophical idea but as a living truth. Every moment with her child had been fleeting, every shared smile had been temporary, and now, in the void left behind, the reality of impermanence revealed itself in its rawest, most intimate form. Yet within this depth of despair, the mother discovered a peculiar clarity. The pain was unbearable, yes, but it was also undeniable. It demanded acknowledgement. It forced her to look, not away, but inward. For the first time, she felt the subtle stirrings of presence, a consciousness that could observe, even in the midst of chaos, even in the grip of grief. She noticed her own breath, the rhythm of her heart, the sensations in her body. This awareness did not take the pain away, but it allowed her to witness it, to hold it gently rather than be swept away. In Buddhist practice, this is the beginning of insight, the recognition that suffering is not separate from the self, but intimately entwined with it. To feel loss fully is to feel alive, to confront the impermanence of existence with open eyes and an open heart. The mother began to understand that her grief, as consuming as it was, could be a teacher. And as with all teachers, it required courage, attention, and a willingness to listen without expectation. Days blurred into nights, yet the mother's engagement with her sorrow became a quiet ritual. She would allow herself to cry, scream silently into the night, and then in rare moments she would simply sit. Sitting with grief without judgment or resistance became a practice in itself. In this practice, she glimpsed the possibility that suffering could be transformed, not eliminated but understood, held, and eventually released. It was a lesson in humility. In the presence of loss, the illusions of control, permanence, and certainty dissolve. She could not change what had happened, could not rewind time, could not reclaim what was lost. And yet in that surrender there emerged a subtle strength, a strength not of force but of openness. A strength born from facing the depth of loss and discovering that even at the bottom of despair, there is a capacity to endure, to notice, and slowly to awaken. Through the relentless tide of grief, the mother began to see the contours of her own heart. She noticed how attachment had shaped her experiences, how expectations had intensified pain, how clinging to the past had chained her to suffering. And in this noticing, there was a seed of liberation, a possibility that grief, when fully faced, could illuminate the path ahead, guiding her toward understanding, compassion, and a quiet, resilient awakening. The depth of loss is not a place we wish to linger, Yet it is precisely in this profound encounter with suffering that the first lessons of awakening arise. The mother's journey was only beginning, and the heartache that seemed unbearable would, in time, reveal itself as a doorway, not to forgetting, not to escaping, but to a presence and clarity that life had never before demanded of her. And so, even amidst the shadows of despair, there is a subtle invitation to feel deeply, to look inward, to notice the impermanence, and to allow the heart to begin its quiet transformation. From this place, the next steps emerge, not as an escape from pain, but as a mindful engagement with it, opening the way to understanding, compassion, and the first glimmers of inner peace. Grief, as the mother discovered, is never confined to quiet sorrow. It comes with a storm of emotions, wild and unpredictable, that batter the mind from every direction. One moment, there is a crushing emptiness. The next, a flash of anger so intense it makes her pulse pound. Waves of guilt crash over her, followed by moments of desperate longing that twist the heart into knots. These are the tides of a mind untamed, the echoes of attachment and desire, the reflections of a world she once thought she controlled but now feels slipping through her fingers. She began to notice the mind's relentless chatter, the replaying of memories, the what-ifs and if-onlys, the endless loops of blame and regret. It was exhausting, as if every thought carried a spark of pain, igniting another fire in the already burning landscape of her heart. Sleep became elusive. Even in dreams, the mind rehearsed the grief, never granting respite. She wondered if the mind could ever be stilled, if the storm could ever pass. In Buddhist understanding, this is the nature of craving and attachment. Our minds cling to what we love, fearing its loss, resisting the inevitable impermanence of all things. The mother's anguish was a vivid illustration of this truth. Each emotion, no matter how overwhelming, was rooted in the human desire for permanence in a world defined by change. She realized painfully that suffering is often intensified not only by the loss itself, but by the resistance to it, the struggle against reality as it is. Anger emerged like a wildfire, directed at the unfairness of life, at the circumstances that snatched her child away, at herself for not being able to prevent it. Yet beneath the anger lay a fragile layer of fear. The fear of living, the fear of feeling, the fear of facing a future that seemed unbearably empty. Grief had peeled away her familiar defenses, revealing vulnerability in its rawest form. And within this vulnerability, the first glimmers of understanding began to stir. She noticed that every emotion, no matter how chaotic, was transient. Even the most intense waves of anger, guilt, or despair eventually ebbed, leaving behind a quiet residue of awareness. This observation was subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but it carried a profound lesson. Emotions are like clouds in the sky, ever-changing, never permanent. They arise, they linger, and they pass. To cling to them or to resist them is to invite suffering. To observe them with gentle attention is the first step toward liberation. In the depths of this emotional turmoil, the mother began to practice a simple, quiet awareness. She would sit, close her eyes, and breathe, letting the waves of feeling pass through her without judgment or suppression. The storm did not vanish, but by noticing it, she discovered a new relationship with her inner life. She was no longer swept entirely by the currents. She could float alongside them, witnessing their patterns, their intensity, their impermanence. This practice, though small, revealed another essential truth, that pain and love are inseparable. The depth of her grief mirrored the depth of her attachment, the magnitude of her love. In Buddhist thought, this is the nature of the human heart. It is capable of immense sorrow because it is also capable of immense compassion. The mother began to glimpse the paradox. Suffering is not only a burden but also a doorway to understanding the boundless capacity of the heart. Yet even as awareness grew, the storm persisted. Some days it raged with such force that she could hardly think, hardly breathe. Other days it softened, leaving her with moments of fragile clarity, as if the mind were reminding her that even within chaos, there are intervals of stillness. These intervals, she realized, were precious. They were the space in which healing could begin, where the seeds of insight could take root. The turbulence of the mind also revealed something unexpected: connection. In sharing her sorrow with others, friends, family, even strangers who had endured similar losses, she found that her pain was reflected in their eyes, and in that reflection, a subtle relief emerged. She was not alone. Her grief, though uniquely hers, was also a thread in the larger tapestry of human suffering. And in this shared experience, the storm of emotions became less isolating, more a bridge to empathy and understanding. Through the relentless waves of anger, guilt, fear, and longing, the mother discovered a quiet truth. To face the storm without resistance is not to surrender to it, but to allow it to teach. Each emotion, each wave of turmoil carries a message about attachment, impermanence, and the human heart. And in learning to meet the mind's storms with gentle attention, she began to take the next step along a path that grief itself had quietly laid before her. A path toward inner clarity, compassion, and the first glimpses of peace that are born not in the absence of suffering, but in its full, courageous presence. In the aftermath of the storm, when the mind finally allows a pause, there emerges a quiet yearning, a desire to find something that endures beyond the relentless waves of grief. For the mother, this yearning was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, like a faint light flickering behind heavy clouds. It was the call to turn inward, to seek solace not in the world that continued without her child, but in the stillness of her own heart. She began to sit quietly, allowing herself to breathe deeply, to feel the rhythm of her own pulse, to notice the subtle rise and fall of each breath. At first, it was difficult. The grief had left the heart raw, the mind restless. Thoughts would intrude relentlessly, pulling her back into the storm, yet she returned again and again to the simple act of presence. The world could wait. Here in this small, silent space, she could begin to listen, to herself, to her pain, and to something far deeper than the mind's chatter. In Buddhist practice, this turning inward is not an escape from suffering, but a courageous facing of it. The mother began to practice mindfulness, observing each emotion as it arose without judgment, without clinging, without the need to push it away. Anger, sorrow, fear. They were no longer enemies to be defeated, but visitors to be acknowledged. In this acknowledgement, she discovered a surprising relief. By observing the storm rather than resisting it, its intensity began to soften. She also discovered meditation, not as a technique to quiet the mind, but as a space to meet herself fully. Sitting in the stillness, she allowed memories to surface, not to deepen the pain, but to honor the love that had existed. She visualized her child's laughter, the warmth of small hands, the quiet moments that had seemed ordinary but now shone with extraordinary significance. In these moments, grief and love coexisted, inseparable yet distinct, teaching her that suffering does not negate beauty, it deepens it. Turning inward also meant listening to the body, to the subtle signals often ignored in the rush of daily life. She felt the tension in her shoulders, the tightness in her chest, the hollow ache in her stomach. Instead of resisting these sensations, she observed them with gentle curiosity, allowing her awareness to flow over each one. In doing so, she discovered that even the body, like the mind, could serve as a teacher, guiding her to recognize the ways she had been holding on too tightly, clinging to pain that wanted to move through her rather than remain trapped inside. There were moments, fleeting yet profound, when she sensed a connection to something greater than herself, a quiet presence that seemed to cradle her grief and remind her of the impermanence of all things. In the Buddhist perspective, this is the essence of insight, the understanding that while loss is inevitable, attachment need not define the entirety of the heart. To turn inward is to cultivate a space where awareness, compassion, and clarity can begin to grow, even amid sorrow. Storytelling often frames solace as a sudden discovery, a dramatic shift in consciousness. But in truth, solace arrives slowly in small increments. A breath noticed, a thought observed without judgment, a tear allowed to flow. For the mother, each of these small acts was a step toward reclaiming herself, a delicate process of rebuilding an inner refuge where the storms of grief could be witnessed without overwhelming her. And in this inward journey, she began to understand that the very pain that had threatened to consume her was also a doorway. It was through the depth of her suffering that she could awaken to the impermanent nature of life, to the intricate web of love and loss, and to the profound capacity of the heart to endure, to notice, and to transform. The practice of turning inward was not about erasing grief, but about meeting it fully, embracing it as a teacher, and discovering within herself a resilience she had not known existed. In the quiet of her own heart, she found fragments of peace, moments where the mind settled, where sorrow softened, where awareness illuminated the shadows. These were the seeds of healing, subtle yet powerful, offering a new way to navigate the landscape of loss. By turning inward, she discovered that solace was not a distant shore to be reached, but a space already present within her, waiting to be noticed, nurtured, and allowed to expand. The journey inward was just beginning, and though the path was neither easy nor linear, each moment of mindful presence, each observation of emotion, each gentle breath taken in awareness became a stepping stone. From this place, she could begin to meet her grief not as a relentless adversary, but as a companion, a guide, and ultimately, a doorway to awakening. Pain, when fully met, has a way of teaching lessons that words alone cannot convey. For the mother, the turning inward had revealed the contours of her grief, the raw edges of her attachment, and the restless currents of her mind. But it was only through lived experience, through feeling deeply, observing without resistance, that the first true insights began to surface. Sitting quietly, she noticed that every wave of sorrow carried a message. It spoke not only of loss, but of love, connection, and the impermanent nature of all things. She realized that grief, in its most honest form, is a mirror reflecting the heart's deepest attachments. In Buddhist teaching, this recognition is crucial. Suffering is not merely to be endured. It is to be understood, to illuminate the patterns of mind and the illusions that bind us. In the soft spaces between tears, she began to perceive a subtle transformation. The heart that once felt fractured and fragile now sensed its own resilience. She noticed that love, even when met with loss, does not vanish. It changes form, it ripples outward, it becomes wisdom. Her sorrow taught her the depth of her own capacity for care, for patience, and for enduring presence. It was a hard-won awakening, born not from comfort, but from the courage to face the raw, unfiltered truth of existence. One evening, she reflected on the impermanence of life, the delicate, transient beauty of every moment she had shared with her child. These memories, once a source of piercing anguish, now carried another layer: gratitude. She could remember without being consumed, feel without being overwhelmed. In the stillness, she glimpsed a fundamental teaching of Buddhism. Life is impermanent, yet precious. Pain is inevitable, yet instructive. To awaken is not to escape suffering, but to engage with it fully, and through this engagement discover clarity, compassion, and understanding. This awakening did not arrive in grand revelations or sudden epiphanies. It came quietly, in moments of noticing. The way the sunlight touched the floor, the subtle rhythm of her own breath, the gentle awareness that she could feel grief and still move through the day. These were the small, almost imperceptible threads that began weaving a tapestry of insight. She understood deeply that suffering is a teacher whose lessons are often hidden in the ordinary, in the unnoticed, in the spaces between life's loudest moments. The mother also began to see her grief in a new light, not as something to escape, but as a bridge connecting her to the broader human experience. She understood that countless others had endured similar losses, and in that understanding, she felt a quiet solidarity. Suffering is universal, and to witness it, to acknowledge it in oneself and others, is the first step toward compassion. In Buddhist terms, this is the cultivation of metta, loving kindness that arises naturally from empathy and insight. As awareness deepened, she realized another truth: suffering is inseparable from growth. The heart that endures loss and remains open becomes a wellspring of wisdom. The mind that observes pain without clinging gains clarity. The soul that faces the impermanence of life without denial awakens to freedom. This awakening, subtle yet profound, was beginning to illuminate her path, showing that even in the depths of despair, there is the potential for insight, transformation, and a quiet, enduring peace. Through the lessons of suffering, the mother began to reframe her relationship with life. The sharp edges of grief were softened by understanding. The weight of loss was balanced by mindfulness and compassion. She saw that awakening is not a distant goal, but a process unfolding moment by moment, breath by breath, through the conscious engagement with both joy and sorrow, presence and absence, love and loss. In this emerging clarity, she glimpsed the paradox at the heart of human existence, that to fully embrace life, we must embrace its impermanence, that to love deeply, we must be willing to grieve, that to awaken, we must turn inward, meet ourselves in the storm, and allow the lessons of suffering to guide us toward understanding, wisdom, and a compassionate heart. And so, from the depths of her sorrow, a quiet awakening began, a subtle, luminous shift in perception that would carry her forward, guiding each step along a path that pain itself had illuminated. The journey was far from complete, but the first lessons were learned, and the heart, though scarred, had begun to open. Grief, when fully embraced, does not remain confined to the heart of the one who suffers. It spreads, like ripples across a still pond, touching lives in ways both subtle and profound. For the mother, the awakening that had begun within her own heart now began to extend outward, shaping her interactions, her presence, and ultimately her purpose. In the quiet moments after the storm, she noticed the small ways her sorrow could be shared, not as a burden but as a bridge. A friend's tearful gaze reflected her own, and in that reflection a bond of understanding formed. A neighbor's struggle with loss mirrored her pain, and in offering a listening ear, she felt a quiet reciprocity. Healing is never solitary. It is woven through shared empathy, through the gentle acknowledgement that we are not alone in our suffering. This realization sparked action. She began to reach out, not from a place of obligation, but from a natural overflow of compassion that had been nurtured by her own journey. Volunteering at support groups, offering words of comfort to those navigating similar losses, simply being present for others. These acts became extensions of the inner work she had cultivated through mindfulness and reflection. Her grief, once a solitary storm, began to transform into a force of connection, understanding, and support. In Buddhist teaching, this is the embodiment of karuna, compassion that arises naturally when suffering is fully understood. It is not pity, nor is it obligation. It is the recognition of shared humanity, the awareness that pain and love are inseparable. The mother discovered that her sorrow, when held with awareness, had the power to illuminate the path for others, to offer solace, and to cultivate a web of care that extended far beyond her own heart. The ripple effect was subtle at first, a kind word here, a moment of quiet presence there. But over time, she observed something remarkable. The more she gave of her compassion, the more her own heart felt expansion instead of contraction. Pain had once isolated her. Now it connected her. Loss had once hollowed her. Now it allowed space for empathy, understanding, and meaningful engagement with the world around her. Even in mundane moments, this transformation revealed itself. Listening attentively to a friend's worries, offering comfort to a neighbor facing difficulty, noticing the unspoken pain in someone's eyes. Each action, each moment of presence became a subtle manifestation of the inner work she had undertaken. The lessons of suffering were no longer confined to personal insight. They were alive in her interactions, in the threads of human connection, in the softening of hearts touched by her presence. The mother also began to recognize another dimension of transformation, the capacity to hold joy alongside grief. In supporting others, she witnessed resilience, hope, and small acts of courage. She celebrated these moments, understanding that the same impermanence that had brought loss also allowed beauty and love to flourish. Grief had not disappeared, but it had been integrated into a broader understanding of life, one in which sorrow and joy coexist, each deepening the meaning of the other. Storytelling often frames transformation as a sudden breakthrough, a dramatic reversal of fortune. But true transformation, she realized, is quieter, more persistent. It is the accumulation of countless small acts, subtle shifts in perception, and conscious choices to respond with awareness rather than reaction. Her grief, once overwhelming and inward-facing, now became a conduit for growth, understanding, and compassionate action. In Buddhist philosophy, this is the essence of skillful means, turning the energy of suffering into wisdom and compassion. The mother saw that while pain could not be erased, it could be transformed, not through force or denial, but through mindful attention, loving presence, and the deliberate choice to channel her experience toward the welfare of others. Each ripple she created carried with it the potential to touch lives in ways she could never fully know, reinforcing the interconnection of all beings. And so, her journey continued, guided by a profound insight. Grief, when fully faced and understood, does not merely diminish, it expands the capacity of the heart. The transformation is not a linear path, nor a destination to be reached. It is a living, unfolding process where every act of compassion, every moment of mindful presence, every recognition of impermanence ripples outward, touching the world in ways subtle yet profound. Through this ripple effect, the mother learned that the lessons of loss are not confined to personal awakening. They are shared, extended, and multiplied through acts of understanding and love. Grief, once a solitary shadow, becomes a luminous thread in the larger tapestry of life, a testament to the resilience of the human heart and the profound potential for transformation embedded in every moment of conscious, compassionate engagement. The mother had begun to see the world through new eyes. The grief that once isolated her, the sorrow that once pressed so heavily upon her chest, now served as a lens through which the impermanent nature of life became unmistakably clear. Every moment, every breath, every fleeting smile carried the truth she had been slowly learning. Nothing lasts, and yet everything matters. In Buddhist philosophy, impermanence, or anicca, is not a concept to be merely understood intellectually. It is to be experienced deeply and personally. The mother felt this truth in the empty spaces of her home, in the lingering scent of her child's favorite blanket, in the way sunlight moved across the floor, tracing patterns that would never repeat. Life, she realized, is a series of moments, each fragile, each precious, each destined to pass. Acceptance was not immediate. At first, it felt like surrender, a yielding to a reality that she longed to resist. But slowly, she began to notice the freedom hidden within this surrender. To accept impermanence was not to stop loving. It was to love more fully, without clinging, without grasping, without demanding permanence from a world that is never still. It was to hold life lightly, and yet with profound appreciation, knowing that every encounter, every touch, every smile carries the weight of both joy and loss. She practiced this acceptance through mindfulness, observing the present moment without judgment, without expectation, without desire to change what had been lost. Each morning she would sit quietly, noticing the sensations in her body, the rhythm of her breath, the flutter of emotions rising and falling. The act of noticing became a practice of liberation, an acknowledgement that life unfolds as it does, and that resistance only prolongs suffering. Through this practice, she began to understand the intimate connection between attachment and pain. Her suffering had been magnified not solely by loss itself, but by her resistance to the fleeting nature of life. The clinging to permanence, to control, to expectation, had intensified the grief. And yet, in the act of letting go, of accepting the impermanent, ever-changing nature of existence, she found a subtle lightness, a gentle easing of the heart. Acceptance also revealed the interwoven nature of joy and sorrow. She noticed that moments of happiness, however brief, were illuminated by the understanding that they, too, were impermanent. Each laugh, each hug, each shared glance became more vivid, more meaningful, more alive. Life was no longer a series of moments to cling to, but a series of moments to be fully felt, fully experienced, and fully appreciated, with the awareness that they will pass, and that in their passing they are no less significant. In embracing impermanence, she also discovered compassion, not only for herself but for others. Recognizing that all beings are subject to loss, suffering, and change, her heart began to soften. The sharp edges of judgment, expectation, and resentment dulled. She could witness the struggles of others without being overwhelmed, offer support without attachment, and love without possessiveness. The impermanence that once felt terrifying became a teacher, guiding her toward deeper empathy and understanding. This acceptance did not erase grief. It did not make loss disappear. What it did was transform the relationship she had with suffering. Pain was no longer an enemy to fight, nor a shadow to hide from. It was a companion on the journey, a guide illuminating the path toward presence, wisdom, and inner peace. Each wave of grief could now be met with awareness, each tear with understanding, each memory with gratitude. The mother realized that embracing impermanence was not a one-time act, but a continuous practice, a daily choosing to see life as it is, moment by moment, without clinging, without denial, without fear. It was a dance with reality, fluid and ever-changing, requiring patience, mindfulness, and courage. And in this dance she found liberation, the freedom to love, to grieve, to live fully, knowing that nothing can be held forever, yet everything leaves its imprint on the heart. In this quiet, profound acceptance, a new sense of presence began to emerge. The mother's heart, though scarred by loss, had opened to the subtle beauty of impermanence. She was learning to flow with life's currents, to witness change without resistance, to hold grief and joy together in a balanced embrace. And in this balance, she discovered a fragile, luminous peace, a peace born not from the absence of suffering, but from the wholehearted embrace of life as it is. With acceptance settling gently into her heart, the mother began to discover that peace is not a distant goal. It is cultivated, moment by moment, through intentional practice. She realized that the mind, once a stormy sea of grief and longing, could be trained, nurtured, and guided. And yet, this cultivation was not about forcing the mind into silence or denying the sorrow that remained. It was about learning to be present, to hold both pain and love with gentle awareness, and to allow stillness to emerge naturally. She began with the simplest of practices, noticing her breath. Inhaling, exhaling, each breath became a point of focus, a bridge between the turbulence of emotion and the quiet center within. When thoughts of loss surfaced, as they inevitably did, she returned to the rhythm of the breath, not as a way to escape, but as a way to anchor herself in the present. Each mindful breath was a gentle affirmation that life continues, and that even in the shadow of grief, she could find a small refuge of calm. Meditation became another cornerstone of her practice. She would sit quietly, allowing memories and emotions to arise, observing them without judgment or resistance. Anger, sadness, longing, all were invited to come and go like passing clouds without clinging or aversion. Through this practice, she began to recognize the transient nature of every feeling, and with that recognition, the power of each emotion to teach rather than overwhelm. The mind, once restless and reactive, slowly learned to witness rather than chase, to hold rather than reject. Daily rituals also played a vital role in cultivating inner peace. She began to integrate mindfulness into ordinary tasks. Washing dishes became a meditation in touch and sensation. Walking outside became a practice of noticing each step, each breath, the movement of air, the rustle of leaves. Even the act of preparing a simple meal was transformed into an exercise in presence, an acknowledgement of life's continuity and the beauty of mundane moments. In these small, consistent acts, she discovered a rhythm that brought balance to her days, a subtle steadiness amid lingering sorrow. The mother also embraced the practice of loving kindness, or metta, extending warmth first to herself and then outward to others. She would silently repeat phrases of compassion. May I be safe, may I be at peace, may I be free from suffering. And then, may you be safe, may you be at peace, may you be free from suffering. In this practice, she noticed a profound shift. The boundaries between self and other softened, and the heart, once consumed by personal grief, began to expand toward empathy and connection. Through these practices, she began to witness the subtle transformations within herself. Impatience softened. Fear loosened its grip. Moments of sorrow no longer felt like bottomless pits, but waves that could be observed, felt, and released. The storm had not vanished, but the way she navigated it had changed. She had developed a steady vessel within, a place of inner calm to return to, no matter how tumultuous the mind became. The cultivation of peace was not limited to meditation or ritual. It extended into how she engaged with the world. She began to listen more deeply, speak more intentionally, and act with awareness rather than reflex. She noticed that peace arises not only in quiet reflection, but also in the choices we make in daily life, in patience, in compassion, in the gentle holding of boundaries, and in responding rather than reacting. Each mindful action became a reinforcement of the inner calm she was nurturing. And in this cultivation, the mother recognized another essential truth. Inner peace is not the absence of suffering, but the presence of awareness. It is the ability to meet life as it unfolds, with clarity, with compassion, and with steadiness. It is the space between breath and thought, between grief and acceptance, where the heart can rest, even amid the ongoing flow of change and impermanence. The practice, she realized, is lifelong. There will always be waves of sorrow, moments of doubt, flashes of fear. Yet with consistent attention, mindful presence, and a heart willing to hold both love and loss, inner peace becomes not a fleeting sensation, but a living quality of being, a steady current beneath the surface of life, guiding each step with awareness, resilience, and compassion. Through breath, meditation, mindfulness, and loving kindness, the mother cultivated a sanctuary within herself. It was a quiet, enduring refuge, shaped by practice and tempered by the lessons of suffering. And in this inner peace, she found not only solace but also the foundation for the next stage of her journey, where the wisdom gleaned from grief could ripple outward, touching others, and transforming not just her own heart, but the world around her. Inner peace, once cultivated, naturally seeks expression. For the mother, the quiet sanctuary she had built within herself began to radiate outward, carrying with it the wisdom distilled from grief, loss, and awakening. She realized that the lessons of suffering are not meant to be hoarded. They are gifts, waiting to be shared with others who navigate the turbulent waters of life. Her first steps were simple: a kind word to a grieving friend, a moment of presence with a neighbor facing hardship, a gentle listening ear to someone struggling with fear or sadness. Each act, though seemingly small, became a conduit for the compassion she had nurtured within. She understood, intuitively, that teaching through pain does not require eloquence or authority. It requires authenticity, presence, and the willingness to be human alongside others. Through her own experience, she discovered that suffering holds a unique capacity to connect hearts. People respond not to abstract teachings, but to the lived reality of someone who has faced grief and emerged with insight. Her own journey became a mirror, reflecting hope and understanding to others. In sharing the raw truths of her loss, the tears, the despair, the moments of fear, she revealed not weakness but courage, resilience, and the transformative power of mindful awareness. She also began to guide others in practices that had helped her: mindful breathing to navigate waves of emotion, meditation to observe thoughts without attachment, and the cultivation of loving kindness toward oneself and others. These teachings were simple, yet profound, rooted in her personal experience rather than theory. People found solace not only in the techniques, but in witnessing the embodiment of peace that had emerged from the crucible of her grief. In Buddhist terms, this is skillful means, turning personal suffering into a source of insight, guidance, and compassion for others. The mother came to understand that her pain, once isolating and overwhelming, had become a bridge connecting her to the wider human experience. Through her presence, she taught that grief, while inevitable, is not a prison. It is a path that, when walked with awareness and compassion, can reveal the deepest truths about love, impermanence, and the resilience of the human heart. Sharing wisdom through pain also deepened her own understanding. Each interaction, each conversation, each moment of listening revealed new dimensions of her journey. She saw that grief manifests differently for everyone, and that there is no single path to healing. By witnessing the struggles of others, she refined her own practice, learning patience, humility, and the endless capacity of the heart to respond with care. Her teachings were subtle yet profound. She did not offer grand solutions or promise the absence of suffering. Instead, she offered presence, guidance, and the reassurance that grief can coexist with love, hope, and understanding. She demonstrated through living example that awakening is not the absence of pain, but the conscious engagement with it, the willingness to face the storm, to learn from it, and to extend the lessons outward in acts of compassion and mindfulness. The ripple effect of her sharing became tangible. Lives touched by her guidance began to cultivate their own awareness, practice, and compassion. The pain that once seemed to isolate her now radiated healing, creating connections and fostering understanding in ways she could never have imagined. Through teaching, she realized that suffering, when embraced and understood, has the power not only to transform the self, but to illuminate the path for countless others. In this chapter of her journey, the mother embodied a profound truth, that wisdom is inseparable from experience, and that the deepest teachings often emerge from the places we most fear to enter. Grief, when met with awareness and compassion, becomes a teacher, a guide, and a bridge to connection. Through sharing her journey, she found meaning, purpose, and the enduring power of human empathy, a testament to the transformative potential of pain when it is fully faced and consciously expressed. And as she continued to share, she sensed the quiet promise of completion, the awareness that the lessons of suffering, once internalized and now extended outward, would culminate in a profound understanding. The heart, when guided by mindfulness, compassion, and the embrace of impermanence, can heal, teach, and illuminate the path for others, even in the face of life's deepest losses. And so the journey comes full circle, not with a dramatic revelation, but with a quiet, profound transformation that speaks in the language of the heart. The mother, once consumed by grief, now moves through the world with a calmness forged in the fires of loss, a presence shaped by awareness, and a heart softened by compassion. Her sorrow has not vanished. It has been integrated, transformed, and honored. She walks each day with a gentle attentiveness, noticing the impermanence of life, the fleeting beauty of moments, and the interconnectedness of all beings. Her grief, once isolating, has become a bridge connecting her to the world, a source of wisdom and empathy that radiates quietly yet powerfully. Each breath, each step, each interaction carries the subtle imprint of her journey, reminders that even in the deepest sorrow, there is potential for insight, growth, and awakening. In the silence of her own heart, she recognizes that suffering was never an enemy to conquer. It was a teacher, a guide, a mirror reflecting both the fragility and resilience of the human spirit. Through mindful presence, through compassionate engagement, and through the embrace of impermanence, she has discovered a profound truth. Life is not measured by the absence of pain, but by the depth with which we meet it, the awareness we cultivate, and the love we allow to flow through us. Her transformation is quiet, unassuming, yet powerful. It is visible not in grand gestures, but in the gentle ways she responds to the world, with patience, kindness, and understanding. It is felt in the ripple effects of her compassion in the hearts she touches, and in the subtle shifts she inspires in others who, like her, navigate the labyrinth of grief and longing. And in this quiet transformation there is freedom. Freedom from clinging, from resistance, from the illusion of control. Freedom to love fully, to grieve fully, and to live fully. The mother has learned that awakening is not a distant horizon. It is present in each mindful breath, each conscious act, each moment of witnessing life as it is, without judgment, without resistance, without fear. Her story, though deeply personal, becomes a universal lesson. That pain, when faced with courage, mindfulness, and compassion, can illuminate the path to wisdom. That loss, when acknowledged and transformed, can give rise to empathy and connection. That impermanence, when embraced, can reveal the preciousness of every fleeting moment. And so, in the silence that follows, there is a quiet celebration, not of forgetting, not of overcoming, but of transformation. A heart that has loved and lost, grieved and awakened, now moves forward with grace, presence, and the luminous understanding that life, in all its fragility, beauty, and impermanence, is a sacred journey to be fully felt, fully embraced, and fully lived. The storm has passed, yet its lessons remain. The heart, though marked by sorrow, beats with clarity. The mind, once turbulent, rests with awareness. And the spirit, tempered by loss, radiates a quiet strength, a testament to the enduring power of love, mindfulness, and the human capacity to transform suffering into wisdom. In the end, the mother's journey is not a story of tragedy alone, but a story of awakening, a silent transformation that whispers through every heartbeat, every breath, and every moment of conscious presence. And in that whisper, there is hope, there is insight, and above all, there is the luminous possibility of peace. And if this journey through grief, mindfulness, and awakening has touched your heart, take a moment to be present here with us. Subscribe to Zen Buddhism Wisdom to continue exploring the teachings of the Buddha, reflections on life, and the gentle practices that bring peace to our minds and hearts. Join our community, and let's walk this path of awareness and compassion together, one mindful moment at a time.